Hey guys, so this week and last week we started talking about decimals. So today we are going to go ahead and go through and kind of review where we left off last week with some place value, and then kind of start talking about what we're going to be working on this week. So kind of depending on whether you're watching the video on Monday, Tuesday, or whether you're watching the video on Thursday, Friday, it's going to depend on how much that you know. But everyone should be familiar with place value after seeing that in class last week. So as you can see up here, I have my place value chart listed. So I'm going to start there with naming my places, and I'm going to start with the familiar part, which is going to be our whole number. So anytime that you have numbers that are to the left of the decimal here, this is going to be our, and I'm not gonna, let's see. This section right here is gonna be our whole number section. So this is where our whole numbers are going to be. So that's the part that we're gonna go ahead and start with today. And I'm gonna go ahead and start with the orange section, because you guys should all know that the orange line there is for the ones place. So I'm gonna list it as the ones. And then we have our light blue section, which is directly to the left of the ones place, and that is the tens place. So I'm going to list it as the tens. We have our pink section to the left of the tens, and that is going to be for the hundreds place. And then the last section that we have, it's kind of hard to see, I'm going to bring you guys a little bit closer. The last section that we have there is our light green section, and this is for our thousands place. So notice we have a comma, because in front of every 3 digits that we have in the whole number section, we do have a comma. So then over here, we're going to include our thousands. So now, while I kind of have you guys up close and personal, I'm going to go ahead and take the time to put numbers in here. And I'm just going to kind of randomly do it. So I have the number 2,846, and I'm going to go ahead and tell the values of those numbers. So for example, the 2 that is in the thousands place, well, it's going to have a value of 2,000, and I'm just going to write that value up top, up above the number. So then the 8 that is in the hundreds place, it's going to have a value of 800. We have the 4, which is in the tens place. We have a value of 40. And then we have 6 in the ones place. It's just going to be worth the 6. So if we're talking about money, this would be like $2,000, $800, $40, and $6. Okay? So we are going to go ahead now, and I'm going to scoot you guys back so we can shift back over to our decimal place value section. And anything that is to the right of the decimal point is going to be our decimal or fractional part. Anytime you make a decimal, you are making a fraction, pretty much. Decimals can be converted to fractions, and fractions can be converted to decimals as well. So that's something to think about. And hopefully you start to see the connection there as well. But I'm going to go ahead and start with my dark blue. My dark blue line right here, so the first place that's to the right of the decimal is going to be the tenths place. Notice that it has that THS on the end of it. That is very important, because if I don't have that THS on the end of it, it's going to be the tens. And the tens and the tenths are 2 totally different places. So the next section, my red section I have, is going to be my hundredths section. And again, it's going to have that THS on the end of it, hundredths. And the last section there, my green section, my dark green section I should say, is my thousandths. And again, you're going to see that THS on the end of that one as well. I kind of ran out of room there. Scoot you closer. So we have those three places after the decimal as well. And I'm going to go ahead and I am going to put numbers in here as well. So I have 4/10, 8 in the hundredths place, and 2 in the thousandths place. And I want to talk about what those values look like. So in the tenths place, that value would represent 4/10. And I would write it as 0.4 or 0 and 4/10. It's important to know that whenever you're stating a decimal number, that the decimal point should be stated as the word and. So I would say this number as 0 and 4/10. Then I have my hundredths, and I have the 8 in the hundredths place. So that is actually going to have a value of 8 hundredths, 0 and 8 hundredths. Last but not least, the 2 in the thousandths place. So it would have a value of 2 thousandths, and that would look just like that, 0 and 2 thousandths. Now, if you notice, I did use similar numbers, so the tens and the tenths, the 8 in the hundreds, 8 in the hundredths, and the 2 in the thousands, and the 2 in the thousandths, because I wanted you guys to be able to see the difference between those numbers. 2,000, the value of the 2 in the thousands place would be 2,000. That is a totally different amount than 2 thousandths. 2,000 is much bigger than 2 thousandths. Then I would have the hundreds, 8 hundredths versus 8 hundredths. Well, 8 hundredths, I always like to talk about it compared to pennies. This is the same thing as 8 pennies. So would you rather have $800 or 8 pennies, 8 cents? And the same thing for the 4. 4 in the tens is 40. 4 in the tenths is 4/10. I can add a 0 onto the back of this, and notice that now becomes 40 cents. Would you rather have 40 cents or $40? Okay, so my whole number values are always going to be bigger there. It is important to know that when looking at our place value in the decimal piece of it, or the fractional part of it, you can take those, you can take these values and write them as fractions. So 4/10 would be the same thing as 4/10. 8 hundredths would look like this, and 2 thousandths would look like this. So as we learn different ways to write the number, it is important for you guys to know that you could see it as decimal form here or as fraction form up here. The last part of this video is going to talk about the number that I have below, 555 and 55 hundredths. And here's where we're going to kind of begin to talk about what we're going to be learning about this week, which is multiplying and dividing by 10, 100, or 1,000. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly write out the value of each of these numbers. So I know that the 5 in the tenths is going to be worth 5/10. I know the 5 in the hundredths is going to be worth 5 hundredths. I know the 5 in the ones is just worth 5. The 5 in the tens is going to be worth 50. And the 5 in the hundreds is going to be worth 500. So what's important for you guys to know here, and I'm going to write the values on both because we're going to use them in both places. We have to understand in 5th grade how the different values are, what they have in common, okay? Obviously, we have in common that the number 5, they all have the number 5 in each of the places, but the values are different, and we have to understand why those values are different. So a lot of times we start talking about which value is bigger, which value is smaller. I think that all of you guys can probably tell me that the biggest value on here is going to be the 500. And that's correct. But what we have to understand is how much bigger is 500 than 50? So I kind of have to think to myself, okay, is there something that I could multiply or divide 50 by in order to get to 500? So for example, this number sentence, 50 times blank equals 500. Okay? Well, if I'm looking at that, I notice that I have 50, and the first part of the number starts with a 50 as well. But I have that extra 0, so I know I have to multiply by something with a 0. And if I think about it, I think if I multiply 50 times 10, I would get to 500. I know 5 times 1 is 5, and then I have 2 zeros, so that would give me 500. So I know that I can multiply 50 times 10 in order to get 500. So I need to see if that kind of checks out with all the other numbers. 5 times 10, 5 times 10 would give me 50. And then this is where it gets to the tricky part, because we haven't learned how to multiply with decimals yet. So you guys are going to be learning something called Don't Let Mom Rap in class. And that's going to kind of help you understand how to multiply by decimals. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you that 5 is 10 times bigger than 5/10. So I can multiply by 10 there as well. 5/100 times 10 would be 5/10. So I can multiply by 10 moving that way. Now if I go backwards, so now I've got to think to myself, well, what can I do to go from 500 to 50? And if you guys know, the opposite operation from multiplication would be division. So all I would have to do is just divide by 10. 50 divided by 10 would give me 5. 5 divided by 10 would give me 5/10. And 5/10 divided by 10 would give me 5/100. So this is the direction that we are heading this week, and we'll talk more about this and Don't Let Mom Rap in class. But this is just a really introduction, a really small introduction into what we are going to be covering this week.